Okay, let's go for it.
Hey, Jessyn, thanks so much for being here today and for taking our questions. My name is Cynthia Brothers, and I run a social media project called Vanishing Seattle, which documents the displaced and disappearing homes, cultures, and institutions of the city, often due to the forces of gentrification and displacement. And as we know, over the past few years, many of our communities have experienced unprecedented gentrification and displacement, not only of our residents, but of small businesses and other institutions that support our social fabric and our cultures. And for the most part, the development that we've been seeing has produced housing and goods that's been out of the reach of, and in a lot of cases, contributing to the displacement of working class and low income, middle class families and seniors, people of color, immigrants and refugees, artists and creatives, folks in the service industry, basically anybody who's not pulling down a six-figure salary. So I feel like the feeling that a lot of folks have here is that all this, things that are being created in Seattle is not really for us. So my question to you is, as mayor, what would you do to support efforts that are holistic, community-driven, that value cultural preservation, to ensure that all of our communities, especially those hardest hit by gentrification and displacement, communities of color, can survive and thrive in place?
Okay, great question. So what would I do to support cultural assets, communities of color, people who are, I'm assuming you all heard the question, so I'll restate it. So number one, as I said at the outset, I deeply believe that we need to accommodate growth throughout the city, and that we can't do it in a cookie-cutter approach, but that no neighborhood can be left off the hook. And so what that then means to me is that we do need a planning process that allocates growth across the city, and what's so core to that then is making sure that we're inventorying cultural assets within that planning process, and I would argue environmental assets as well. And so there are three different things that I would want to focus on moving forward. Number one, I do support the recommendations in HALA and the MHA process. I do think that we need to go much bigger, that you can't address affordability through private sector incentives. That is a piece of the puzzle, but that cannot be the entire piece of the puzzle. So we need to inventory surplus property across the city. And we need to turn that into affordable, low-income public housing, what at one time was called public housing. And we need a recommitment in that, because stable, long-term housing provides economic benefits to people. The second thing that I would do is use the city's resources to put together the partners to actually do those developments. I've gotten a chance now to see how time-consuming and important it is to put together nonprofit developers and other community partners as we're working towards Capitol Hill Station and Northgate. That requires a lot of effort, and I would want the city to play a key role in identifying the surplus property and then bringing together partners to do it. And then the third piece of the puzzle, again, and I've referenced this, but I think that it's really core, is that different communities have different needs. So as we're talking about the upzone in the ID in Little Saigon, you have some supports that will preserve parts of that community. For example, a lot of the buildings on the west side of I-5 are in historic preservation, right? But on the east side of I-5, that is a very, Little Saigon, I think, has really important cultural assets. And we need to figure out, in dialogue with that community, and that's where the community dialogue really matters, how do we accommodate more growth and how do we preserve the cultural assets? And I think that there are ways to do that when you ask the community that question. What is it that we're going to do?
Thank you. In terms of historic preservation and how that applies to buildings and existing housing stock, some of what you see in the ID, can you say a bit more about what sorts of efforts or resources you would put towards, maintaining those cultural assets, but also, opening that up for more housing availability for folks in those communities?
So again, I do think that we're going to have to focus density in places where there are transit stations and that kind of thing. The ID is one of those places. But the question then becomes, how do we do it in a way that doesn't tear a community apart? And bad planning literally runs through that community, where a highway was built 50 years ago, right? Cutting that community in half. So we have an example literally written into or built into our city's built environment around what bad planning looks like and what planning that is not community focused looks like. So then specifically, I think that there are surplus properties in that community, and there are other government-owned properties in that community. I think it would be really interesting to identify those and to put some of those in different kinds of ownership, community trusts. There are different ways to preserve equity for homeowners, helping people get into the market so that they're not just necessarily renting low-income housing. There are lots of models.
1 minute left.
Oh, sorry. So those are things. And then another piece of that is small business support. And are there ways where we can provide, as we are providing some supports for tenants around first and last month rent, around some of those things that have been passed into law recently, can we look at those same things for small businesses so that we're supporting not just tenants, but small businesses which make up the fabric of our community?